Footsteps in the snow. Morning sunlight glinted off the fresh snow, creating the illusion of millions of diamonds scattered across the yard. Emily Winters stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warming her palms, studying the peculiar scene that greeted her, a series of distinct footprints, too small to belong to her husband Jake. "Strange," she murmured, leaning closer to the glass. The footprints began at the street, passed by the living room window, and disappeared around the corner of their suburban Denver home, heading toward the backyard. Women's prints, narrow heel, elegant shape, something knotted in her stomach. "You're up early," Jake remarked, appearing behind her dressed in his charcoal suit, briefcase in hand. Emily didn't turn around. "Did you hear anyone outside last night? Number Y?" His voice sounded carefully neutral. "There are footprints in the snow," she pointed. "Women's footprints?" Jake approached, standing close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. His reflection in the window revealed nothing. "Probably kids from the neighborhood." "They lead right to our house, Jake, to our backyard." He checked his watch. "I've got that meeting at 9. We'll talk about this tonight, okay?" He kissed her cheek, his lips barely grazing her skin. "Love you." Emily watched him walk to his car, noting how he deliberately avoided looking at the footprints. 3 months married and already secrets wedged between them like ice. She grabbed her phone and stepped outside, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. The footprints were deeper than she'd initially thought. Someone running, not walking, running toward their home, not away. That night, Emily feigned sleep, keeping her breathing measured as she watched Jake through half-closed lids. At 2:13 a.m., he slipped from bed, checking to ensure she remained still before padding down the hallway. She waited 10 seconds, then followed silently, stopping at the edge of the living room. Jake stood on the balcony, shivering in his t-shirt despite the freezing temperature, peering intently into the darkness. Minutes passed, then movement, a shadow shifting across the snow-covered yard. A figure approached the house, agile and determined. Emily's pulse quickened as the person began climbing the trellis with practiced ease, gloved hands finding invisible holds in the darkness. Jake reached out, helping the woman over the railing. The stranger stepped into the yellow pool of light from the street lamp. Dark hair, slender frame, Sarah, her best friend since college. Emily's knees nearly buckled. The betrayal struck like physical pain, hot and sharp behind her ribs. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, watching as Sarah slipped through the balcony door Jake held open, their hushed voices too low to distinguish words. "What the hell is going on?" Emily's voice shattered the silence as she flipped on the lights, illuminating the scene in harsh fluorescence. Jake froze mid-sentence, eyes widening. Sarah spun toward the kitchen, emerging seconds later with a chef's knife clutched in her trembling hand. "Emily, don't move," Sarah whispered, her gaze darting between Emily and Jake. "Put that down." Jake raised his hands. "This is insane." "You need to listen to me." Sarah's voice cracked, knuckles white around the knife handle. "I didn't want to tell you like this." "Tell me what? That you're sleeping with my husband?" Emily's voice rose hysterically. Sarah's expression shifted to horror. "God, no." "Nothing like that." She turned the knife away from Emily, pointing it at Jake. "I was trying to save you, Em. I had to be sure before I told you." "Save me? From what?" "From him," Sarah said, eyes locked on Jake. "He's not who you think he is." Jake's laugh sounded hollow. "Emily, honey, she's clearly having some kind of breakdown." "Am I?" Sarah challenged. "Should I tell her about the others, Jake? Or should I call you by your real name?" "She's delusional, Emily," Jake pleaded, edging away from Sarah's knife. She's been obsessed with me since we met. I've been trying to let her down gently. Sarah laughed bitterly. I found something, Em. Computer files, encrypted, but not well enough. At first, I didn't believe it either. She broke into my office, Jake countered. She's stalking us. That's whose footprints you saw. She's been watching our house. Emily's head spun. Sarah had always been the rational one, the steady friend who grounded her. But Jake, she'd married him, chosen him, built a life with him. He has another phone, Sarah said quietly. The one he keeps in the air vent in his office. Jake's face drained of color. Is that true? Emily whispered. His hesitation was answer enough. Heart pounding, she rushed to his home office, dragging a chair to reach the vent. Inside was a sleek black phone she'd never seen before. With trembling fingers, she brought it to life. Through encrypted messages about targets and replacements, photos of women who looked strikingly similar to her, transaction records for large sums of money. What is this? She demanded, returning to the living room where Sarah still held Jake at bay. It's not what it looks like, Jake insisted. Then what is it? His silence filled the room like poison gas. The next day, Emily followed Jake's silver Audi at a careful distance, Sarah's warnings echoing in her mind. 3 hours of mundane errands almost convinced her of his innocence, until he turned abruptly into an industrial district across town. Heart pounding, she watched him punch a code into a nondescript storage unit before disappearing inside. 20 minutes later, when he emerged and drove away, Emily approached the unit with dread pooling in her stomach. The code, their wedding date, opened the padlock with a soft click. Inside, illuminated only by her phone's flashlight, were walls covered in surveillance photos. Emily staggered backward, hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a scream. There she was, sleeping, shopping, jogging, meeting friends for lunch, in hundreds of images taken without her knowledge, some from before they'd even met. Jake had been watching her for months before their chance encounter at the coffee shop. But most disturbing were the photos of herself she'd never posed for, because they weren't her at all. Different women with her same build, hair color, and style, all photographed from the same angles. Some photos marked with red X's, others with circles and dates. On a small desk sat a folder labeled Emily Winters, Acquisition Complete. Inside were copies of her birth certificate, bank statements, insurance policies, and a document transferring her inheritance from her grandmother into a shell company. I think he's hunted others before me, Emily whispered as she and Sarah pored over Jake's encrypted laptop files in the safety of a hotel room. Sarah nodded grimly. Look at these. She pointed to a spreadsheet titled Replacements. Names, dates, locations, all meticulously cataloged. 6 women spanning 8 years. Each entry ended with completed, except for the last, Emily Winters, in progress. The final column contained links to news articles about missing persons. Oh, God, Emily gasped, clicking one. A woman's face filled the screen, so similar to her own, they could be sisters. Amber Lawson, 31, last seen leaving her apartment in Portland. The article, dated 3 years ago, reported her still missing, presumed dead. He finds women who look alike, Sarah said softly, gets close to them, marries them, gains control of their assets, and then they disappear. Why didn't you go to the police? Emily demanded. With what? Encrypted files I illegally accessed? He's careful, Em. There's never any evidence tying him to the disappearances. Just women who look like you, vanishing after meeting a man whose description changes with each city. When Jake returned home that evening, Emily's hands shook as she poured wine, trying to act normal while Sarah waited at a nearby cafe, ready with an emergency extraction plan. "You seem tense," Jake said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Long day," she managed. He nodded, watching her with unsettling intensity. "I stopped by my storage unit today. The lock seemed different." Ice flooded Emily's veins. "Oh?" Someone had been there. His voice was conversational, but his eyes were calculating. "Anything you want to tell me, Emily?" "I don't know what you're talking about." He reached for her hand, his grip painfully tight. "Where were you this afternoon?" "Shopping. Ask the barista at Cornerstone Coffee. I was there for hours." His smile tightened. "Funny, because your location shows you were across town." Emily's phone. He'd been tracking her all along. She excused herself to use the bathroom, texting Sarah frantically. When she returned, Jake had prepared her favorite tea. "Drink up," he urged with unusual insistence. "It'll help you relax." She pretended to sip, noticing the strange film on the surface. Later, when he thought she was asleep, she dumped the drugged tea and slipped from the house into the falling snow. Snow fell in thick curtains as Emily fled into the woods behind their neighborhood, Jake's enraged shouts fading behind her. Her breath came in panicked clouds as branches clawed at her face and frozen underbrush tore at her ankles. Disoriented in the whiteout, she stumbled forward until a dark shape materialized. A small cabin, windows dark. Desperate, she broke a window with her elbow, tumbling inside onto a hardwood floor. "Don't scream," came a woman's voice from the shadows. "He might hear you." Emily scrambled backward. "Who's there?" A match flared, illuminating a gaunt face. Thin, pale, with hollow eyes and tangled blonde hair, the woman emerged cautiously from behind a partition. "You're one of his, aren't you? I can tell. We all have the same look." "Who are you?" The woman's smile was a broken thing. "Melissa. I was his wife, once." She pushed back her sleeve, revealing a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. "The first wife, anyway. Before you, there were 2 others that I know of." "He told me his first wife died in a car accident." Melissa laughed bitterly. "He tells all his wives that story. Different names, different backgrounds, but always the same pattern. The perfect husband, until he's not." As dawn broke, Emily pieced together the horrifying truth from Melissa's story. Jake Harrison wasn't even his real name. He'd perfected a pattern over a decade. Identify wealthy women who fit a specific profile. Create chance meetings, whirlwind romances, marriage, and then disappearance. Melissa had escaped, but barely, living in hiding for years. Sarah had stumbled onto the truth while helping Jake with tech support, discovering his encrypted files by accident. "He keeps trophies," Melissa whispered. "A ring from each wife. He wears them on a chain when he thinks no one is watching." When Jake's voice called from the woods, they were ready. The confrontation was brutal, Jake's charming mask falling away completely as he realized the depth of their knowledge. "You think you're the first to try escaping?" he snarled, advancing on them as snow swirled around the cabin. "None of you understand what you're dealing with." He never noticed the police Sarah had called closing in until the megaphone blast froze him mid-step. As he was led away in handcuffs, Jake's eyes locked with Emily's. "You think this ends here?" He laughed, a sound devoid of humanity. "Check your wedding ring, Emily. I'm always watching." That night, in a safe house across town, Emily examined the tiny gem in her wedding band under a magnifying glass, finding a microscopic tracking device embedded in the stone. Then her phone, a new one, unknown to Jake, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "See you soon, wife, J double quote." But what the police discovered hours later in Jake's cell chilled Emily to her core. The man they'd arrested wasn't Jake. The real Jake had never been caught. The man in custody was a decoy, a patsy with altered appearance. And even more terrifying, the message wasn't from Jake at all. It was from James, Jake's identical twin brother they never knew existed, continuing the family business their father had started decades before. The game wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning.
If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications.